This is a series about the most successful lie ever told. A lie that convinced us that human progress requires a master and that freedom is the price we must pay for survival. This is the Great Ubaidian Hoax. We're going to trace the history of power from the first temples of Sumer to the marble halls of Greece. We are going to find the moments where we traded our agency for a leash tied to divine favor. In this first episode, we are going back to the source before the pyramids, before the first crown was forged. This is the story of the Ubaid. It began in the fertile marshes of southern Iraq, the land we were taught to call the cradle of civilization. For 3,000 years, these people maintained a state of radical peaceful egalitarianism. They didn't just stumble into this, they chose it. They built a world that stubbornly refused to let anyone climb above anyone else. In their world, to be civilized didn't mean having a king. We're going to look at the archaeological receipts that prove a kingless society wasn't just possible, but that it was our baseline for millennia. And then we're going to watch it all crumble. We'll see how a massive climate shift created a great squeeze, forcing our ancestors into the first cities and right into the clutches of the world's first divine rulers. The hoax wasn't an upgrade to a better system. It was the violent dismantling of an egalitarian system, where the people treated everyone with equality. If you want to see the Ubaidian hoax in the flesh, look at the Mosul Reservoir in modern-day Iraq. As the waters recede due to drought, ancient mud-brick walls are emerging from the depths. It is a perfect haunting mirror of the past. For 30 centuries, the world was open, but buried beneath the sands is a secret. A secret of a people who lived in sprawling towns, without a single king, who managed the world's greatest rivers, without a single tax collector. To understand what we lost in the sands of time, we have to look at what archaeologists call the evidence of absence. The dirt tells a story of how the Ubaid lived in the absence of any rulers. The receipt is in the layout of the village and the floor plans of the homes. When we dig up an Ubaid village, every house is nearly the same size. These are the tripartite houses, a central hall flanked by smaller rooms. From the largest family to the smallest, the footprint of life was the same. No one lived in a mansion while their neighbor lived in a shack. Even the trash confirms the story. We've analyzed the animal bones from their ancient refuse pits, and the results are undeniable. Everyone was eating the same cuts of meat. The hunters didn't bring the prime rib to a chieftain, they brought it to the fire. Equality wasn't an abstract dream back then. It was a daily, biological reality. They had irrigation, they had technology, but it was human scale, small channels managed by families and neighbors. The off switch for survival wasn't held by a priest in a temple, it was held by the community. Power was horizontal. It was a world where no one was big enough to break the frame. But then the world changed, the rain stopped, the rivers shifted. Archaeological evidence points to a phenomenon known as the 4.2 kiloyear event, a global megadrought. Rivers became unreliable. The marshes dried up. People couldn't just walk away from a tyrant anymore, because there was nowhere left to go. They were forced to retreat to the few places where water still flowed. They huddled together in the first cities, like Ur-Lok, but these weren't cities of choice. They were refugee camps of necessity. In these crowded camps, they lost their dignity and the culture of the tribes shattered. And in that panic, the divine rulers became the brokers of fear. They looked at a starving population and told them their hunger was a moral failing. They said the rivers have dried because you haven't given enough to the temple. Give us your devotion and we'll give you back the rain. They turned a natural disaster into a business model where they convinced people to trade their freedom for a bowl of grain and a lifetime of tax and toil. And what an ordinary bowl it was. The beveldrim bowl was meant to measure out a meager unit of grain. No longer did a family cook their own harvest. Instead, they stood in line at the temple to be handed a daily allowance of survival. 2 liters a day for the men, half that for the women, and even less for the children. Just enough calories to keep the laborers building the temples, but never enough to build a surplus or buy their way out of the system. The bowl was the contract, your labor for your life. To manage this, they invented writing. The first thousands of clay tablets aren't poetry. They are ledgers, tax receipts, lists of who owed the temple their lives. By creating the word, the priest-kings created a reality the common farmer couldn't argue with. If a scribe pressed a reed into clay and said you owed 10 bushels, that became the truth. This was the birth of bureaucracy, the invisible wall between the ruler and the ruled. The Great Ubaidian Hoax was complete. If you want to see the hoax in slow motion, you have to look at the city of Eridu. Archaeologists digging into the foundations of the Great Temple of Enki found something remarkable. They found 18 levels of buildings, stacked directly on top of each other. At the very bottom, at level 18, there is a simple, tiny room, a small altar, a place where Ubaid families brought small offerings of fish from the marshes. There were no walls, no restricted access. But as you move up through the layers of dirt, the building changes. Level by level, the walls get thicker, the rooms get more private, the altars get higher. By the time you reach the top layers, the simple room has been swallowed by a massive ziggurat. The priest-kings literally built the Great Hoax on top of the old world. They took a place of community and turned it into a fortress of exclusion. They didn't just build a temple, they built a high ground, a place where they could look down on the people and tell them that the god was closer to the ceiling than to the street. But the Ubaid didn't surrender to a king in a day. They surrendered to the fear of tomorrow, one ration bowl at a time. As they hauled the first heavy stones to the center of their villages, they thought they were building a sanctuary. They thought they were buying back the rain. They didn't know it yet, but they were laying the foundations for the gods that failed. It was the birth of a pattern, emerging again and again, like a ghost in the machine, from the pharaohs of Egypt to the emperors of Rome to the monarchs of the Middle Ages. Once the steward realized he could trade protection for submission, the seal was broken. The tyrannical changed their clothes, they changed their names, and they changed the gods they claimed to serve. But the Ubaidian hoax remains the foundation. As we move forward in this series, we are going to unravel these future forms of control. We are going to look at the mass graves, the slave markets, and the monumental vanity of the kings. But as we watch the world burn in the name of progress, remember the Ubaid. Remember that before the first city was a fortress, it was a home. The hoax didn't just steal our grain, it stole our memory of what it means to be human.